In a drawer, inside a private collection somewhere in the United States, there is a small lock of pale, almost whitish blonde hair. A faded label, written in French, calls it the hair of Leonardo da Vinci. For 500 years, the world has known this man by that name. Yet, here is the strange thing hiding inside it. Da Vinci was never his surname. It was never anyone's surname. And the one test that could prove whose head this hair came from has never once been carried out. Why that matters is simple. If the name is not really a name, and the body has never been confirmed, then the most documented genius who ever lived rests on evidence thinner than a single strand of hair. When that lock was unveiled in 2019, on the 500th anniversary of his death, the reaction was not celebration, it was doubt. The researchers who presented it would not say it was his. The director of the Uffizi Gallery in Florence said flatly that no serious specialist believed it. A geneticist at the University of Leicester said there was almost no reliable way to tie it to Leonardo at all. The relic meant to bring us closer to the man only exposed how little of him we can actually hold. Now let's talk about what the evidence actually shows. To understand why a strand of hair could cause this much trouble, you have to understand the effort built around it. In 2016, a group of scientists launched something called the Leonardo da Vinci DNA Project. It was coordinated from the Rockefeller University in New York, and it drew in the J. Craig Venter Institute in California, the University of Florence, and a network of other institutions. Its director, Jesse Ausubel, described an almost impossible ambition. The team wanted to recover Leonardo's genetic profile, to read in some form the biology of the man himself. The centerpiece of that ambition was a single piece of the human genome, the Y chromosome. Here is the simple version, and it will matter more and more as we go. The Y chromosome passes from father to son, almost unchanged, generation after generation. A daughter does not carry it. It is, in effect, a surname written in biology, handed down the male line while the rest of the genome shuffles and reshuffles with every marriage. If you want to trace a family through the centuries, and you only have one thread to pull, the Y chromosome is the thread. Everyone involved agreed on the stakes. Documents can be forged, misread, or lost. Church registers burn. Tombs are moved. But biology, in theory, does not lie. If the project could find Leonardo's Y chromosome, it could finally settle questions that 5 centuries of paper had only argued about. Where his family truly came from, whether the bones in his tomb were his, whether a hair or a fingerprint pressed into a page could still speak for him. That was the plan, and the very first thing the project ran into was not in a laboratory. It was in the man's own name. Before a single bone or hair could be tested, the evidence ran into a problem sitting in plain sight, one the whole world had been repeating for centuries without noticing. Leonardo da Vinci was not called Leonardo da Vinci. His full name, the one in the record, was Leonardo di Ser Piero da Vinci. Translated, it reads, Leonardo, son of Ser Piero, from Vinci. Read that again slowly, because every piece of it is doing a job. Leonardo is his name. Di Ser Piero means son of Ser Piero, his father, the word Ser marking Piero as a man of standing, a notary. And da Vinci, the part we treat as a surname, simply means from Vinci. Vinci is a small hill town in Tuscany, roughly 20 miles from Florence, where he was born in 1452. The record shows that da Vinci was never a family name, it was an address. In that time and place, most ordinary people had no inherited surname at all. You were distinguished by your father's name, or by where you came from, or by both. Anyone born in that town could be called da Vinci, in exactly the way anyone from Troy might be called of Troy. It described a place. It described hundreds of people. It was never meant to describe a bloodline. And that is the quiet fracture at the base of everything. The project set out to trace the Da Vinci bloodline, but Da Vinci had never named a bloodline. It named a hillside. So whose blood were they actually about to follow? The answer is stranger than the question, and it points to a gap at the very center of the family tree. In 2025, the project announced its breakthrough. After roughly 30 years of genealogical work by the historians Alessandro Vezzosi and Agnese Sabato, and after DNA testing led by the molecular anthropologist David Caramelli and the forensic anthropologist Elena Pilli, the team confirmed something remarkable. They had identified 15 living male line descendants of the family. 6 of them agreed to be tested, and segments of their Y chromosomes matched, confirming an unbroken male line reaching back at least 15 generations. It sounds like the mystery is solved. It is not. Look closely at the wording, because the record shows a hole exactly where you would expect Leonardo to be. Those 15 descendants are not descended from Leonardo. They descend from his father, Piero, and from his half-brother, Domenico, not from the genius himself. Here is why. Leonardo had no children, he never married, and he left no direct descendants of his own. Remember the rule of the Y chromosome. It moves only from father to son. A man with no sons is, genetically speaking, the end of his own line. Leonardo's personal thread simply stops. It goes nowhere. So the line the project reconstructed, the one stretching across 21 generations, back to an ancestor born as early as 1331, is the patriline. It is the line of the father. It is the di ser Piero, part of the name, the part almost nobody ever says out loud. The living Da Vinci Y chromosome is real. It just does not run through Leonardo. It runs past him, and that leaves the project in a peculiar position. Even a perfect match between those living men and some ancient set of bones would still never have touched Leonardo's own body, which raises the next question, the one everyone assumed was already answered. What about the bones in his tomb? The strangest part of the tomb is not that the bones might not be his, it is that no one has ever been allowed to ask. Leonardo died in France in 1519, in the town of Amboise, in the service of King Francis I. By his own wish, he was buried in the collegiate church of St. Florentin, inside the grounds of the royal chateau. And that, for a long time, is where the trail should have ended. It did not. The church was pillaged during France's religious wars, then fell into ruin, and was eventually torn down. Leonardo's grave was lost. Then, in 1863, an excavation in the ruins uncovered a skeleton, and near it, fragments of a broken stone bearing pieces of a Latin inscription. The surviving letters spelled out parts of the words Leonardo da Vinci. There were also medals dated to the reign of Francis I. On that evidence, the remains were declared to be Leonardo's and reburied in the small chapel of Saint Hubert, where a marble slab still carries his name today. Now, at first glance, that inscription seems to close the case. His name, carved in stone, found beside the body. What more could you want? But a closer look tells a very different story. The fragments were partial and broken, the church had been destroyed and its graves disturbed, its remains shuffled and scattered before anyone went looking. A name chipped onto a stone, recovered centuries later from a ruin, is not the same as a body. It is a label found near a body. And this is where the second problem enters, the one that shadows every result from here on. In forensics, it is called the reference sample problem, or the chain of custody. Think of it like this. A fingerprint is worthless on its own. It only means something when you can match it against a known print already in a database. Without that trusted reference, a fingerprint is just a smudge. The bones at Amboise are exactly that smudge. They are a fingerprint with no verified print to match against, because the presumed remains have never been genetically tested, and access to test them has not been granted. So what does that leave the project holding? A hair, a fingerprint on a page, and a comparison with nothing at its center. But the most unsettling part of the evidence was still coming, and it ties every loose thread into one knot. Return to that lock of hair, the pale strands in the American drawer, presented in 2019 with a French label and, beside it, a bronze ring said to have been worn by Leonardo himself. It was announced as the key that would finally let the project read his DNA. The experts were not convinced. Eike Schmidt, then director of the Uffizi Gallery, said no specialist thought the hair was real, and that it was extremely unlikely a lock of Leonardo's hair could have surfaced in a private American collection at all. Kevin Schurer, a geneticist and historian at the University of Leicester, went further, saying there was probably no reliable way to link the hair to Leonardo in the first place. Even the project's own director, Jesse Ausubel, spoke only of a future possibility that one day even a tiny fingerprint pressed into a manuscript page might hold cells worth sequencing. But notice what all of it depends on. The record shows the same missing piece under every single object. The hair, the bones, the fingerprint on the page, each one is only as good as the reference you compare it against. And the reference, the one undisputed sample taken from Leonardo's own confirmed body, does not exist. It has never existed. Every relic is a fingerprint held up to an empty database, which means the only genetic thread anyone can actually follow does not lead to the hair, or the tomb, or the drawer.
It leads somewhere no one expected. It leads straight back to the one part of his name the world decided to throw away.
So if Da Vinci was never his surname, where did the idea come from? Why does the entire planet call him by an address? The answer is that the surname was invented by everyone who came after him. In his own lifetime, Leonardo had no family name to inherit, because in 15th century Tuscany, most people simply did not. He was Leonardo, the son of Piero, from Vinci, and in different documents he might be recorded in different ways, sometimes by his father, sometimes by his town. The town won. As his fame spread across Europe and then across the centuries, his first name alone was not enough to hold a legend that large. The world needed a handle, something singular, something that sounded like the name of a great man. Da Vinci was already attached to him, so Da Vinci is what stuck. This was not unusual for the age, only unusually successful. Think of the other giants of the Renaissance. The man we call Raphael was Raffaello of Urbino. Michelangelo's full name ran all the way to Michelangelo di Lodovico Buonarroti. These were not tidy modern surnames. They were the same mixture of fathers and places and trades, later flattened by history into single, marketable names. Leonardo simply became the most famous example of all. And then something modern happened. Later generations, living in a world where everyone does inherit a surname, looked back and quietly assumed he must have had one too. The place name hardened into a last name. Museums printed it, encyclopedias fixed it, and eventually popular culture sealed it completely, right down to a certain global bestseller in its film, built entirely around the idea that Da Vinci was the name of a man, and not the name of a town.
The belief, in other words, was a product of its time, not of the evidence. It served a simple need. A singular genius seems to demand a singular name. But the record shows that the name was never his in the way we imagine, which sets up the final and strangest turn of all. Because the one name genetics can actually prove is the one nobody ever uses. Follow that thread all the way down, and it arrives somewhere no one expects. The only bloodline the science can trace, the shared Y chromosome carried by those 6 living men, the line running back to an ancestor born in 1331, is not the line of Vinci. It is the line of the father. It is the Dicer Piero. It is the inheritance of Piero, the notary, passed son to son, quietly, for 600 years. Sit with what that means. The name the whole world uses, Da Vinci, points to a place, and a place leaves no genetic trace at all. There is no chromosome for a hillside. But the name the world forgot, the father's name, the one buried in the middle of the phrase where nobody ever looks, is the only part of him that any test can ever reach. There has never been a confirmed sample from Leonardo's own body. There has never been a bone from that tomb that anyone was permitted to test. There has never been a hair conclusively tied to his head or a fingerprint matched against a known print of his. Everything we long to prove about the man himself, we cannot. And the one thing the Y chromosome can prove, it proves about his father's line, not about the genius at all. The thread we can follow leads to Piero. The thread we cannot follow is Leonardo. The name that made him immortal is the one that vanishes the moment you go looking for it in the blood. So here is what all of it actually amounts to, stated plainly. The name the world knows him by is a geographic label. The science built to decode the Da Vinci bloodline can only ever reach his father's line, and it has never once touched Leonardo's own body. The relics that promise us the man, the hair, the bones, the fingerprint, are each a fingerprint with no database to match against. But this is the part that matters, and it is important not to overreach. None of this erases what we actually know. It does not make the paintings less real. The Mona Lisa still hangs in the Louvre. The notebooks still fill their thousands of pages with flying machines and dissected hearts and mirror-written thoughts. The man still lived, still worked in Amboise in his final years, still died in 1519, and was mourned by a king who called him a father. All of that is documented and solid and untouched by any of this. The fragility is not in the achievement, the fragility is in the anchor. We have the work of Leonardo in overwhelming, breathtaking abundance. What we do not have, what we may never have, is the physical certainty of the body that made it. And that gap, it turns out, has been sitting quietly inside his name the entire time, in plain sight, for 500 years. Which brings us back to that drawer. A small lock of pale hair, and beside it a bronze ring resting in a private collection an ocean away from the town he was named for. Before, it looked like a relic, a piece of a great man waiting for science to confirm it. Now it looks like something else entirely. It looks like the whole story in miniature. A strand of hair standing in for a body no one can confirm.
A French label making a claim no test has ever settled. A ring said to be his, resting under a name that was never really his to begin with. Everything we believe about the object we believe on faith, held together by a label and a hope. And if that is true of the hair, then look at how far it reaches. The most studied, most painted, most written about human being of the entire Renaissance, a man whose every surviving notebook we have pored over for centuries, comes down, in the end, to this. Evidence as fragile as a single strand of whitish blonde hair. A few broken letters on a stone in a ruined church. A place name we mistook for a family for 500 years. We like to think the past is settled, that the famous dead are fully known to us. But the closer you look at even the most certain of them, the more you find that certainty resting on almost nothing at all. A hair, an inscription, a name that points to a hill. What we choose to believe, with an anchor this thin, is entirely up to us.